Welcome to the debate. Today we are turning our analytical lens toward a really fascinating development in contemporary music, specifically within the ska and rocksteady scene. We are examining the musical narrative of Lola Dune. Now, for those who might not be strictly following the latest in, AI-generated artistry, Lola is an emerging AI artist who has been incredibly open about her origins. She brings an enormous amount of heart, humor, curves, and just this immense personality to a classic, deeply rooted genre. And by her own admission, she didn't arrive on the scene trying to be the youngest or most polished voice on the stage. In fact, she famously describes herself as the female ska version of Jim Carrey in the movie The Cable Guy.
Which is such a brilliant, self-deprecating comparison. I mean, it immediately tells you she is completely aware of her own intensity. If you think about that character, overwhelmingly eager, desperate for connection, and frankly, a bit much for the person on the receiving end. She uses that comparison as a nod to the fact that she essentially entered this genre to get closer to a rude boy, someone who was already playing in a ska band. So she followed a personal connection into this musical world, but the music itself quickly took hold of her, and she has since built a vibrant catalog, most notably a series of month-themed songs. You have January Song, February Song, and another track called More Than I Needed. These tracks are all dedicated to this mysterious rude boy, and they lay bare a deeply complex relational dynamic.
Exactly. And the central question we are exploring today surrounds the profound psychological tension sitting right at the core of these specific tracks. We are looking at how this dynamic unfolds between two fundamentally different communicators. To put my cards on the table, I argue that Lola Dune's work primarily exposes silence as an active, oppressive force that exerts enormous emotional weight and creates profound relational misattunement.
And my position is quite different. I argue that Lola's work is actually a highly self-aware exploration of how an expressive person's internal anxiety and overthinking project conflict onto a passive, emotionally distinct counterpart.
All right, let's take a step back and establish exactly what we're looking at here. When we examine the emotional geometry of Lola Dune's work, it becomes clear to me that the quieter person's withdrawal is in no way a neutral act. We really have to look at the origin of the nickname she uses for this rude boy throughout these tracks. She calls him Santa. Now, this moniker wasn't chosen because he brings gifts or spreads holiday cheer.
No, definitely not.
Right. It was coined out of a very specific quiet frustration. Her messages to him were frequently going unacknowledged. She eventually communicated that, without any confirmation of receipt, sending him messages felt like writing letters to Santa and sending them off into an absolute void.
Which perfectly sets up the listener to understand her internal state of mind. It establishes her baseline of anxiety.
Sure, but it also establishes his baseline of behavior. In this context, I see the rude boy's silence operating as a powerful mechanism of distance. I mean, we've all been there, right? You send a vulnerable text, you see the 3 dots appear, and then nothing. But imagine that nothing stretching out for weeks while you're trying to build a genuine friendship and collaborate musically. Lola's music masterfully illustrates the immense psychological strain that occurs when one person's vulnerability is met with a silence that inevitably lands as fear, confusion, and abandonment. She is experiencing what therapists call relational misattunement.
Well, let's define that for the audience because I think it's central to where we disagree.
Gladly. Relational misattunement is basically when two people are completely out of sync on an emotional frequency, and one person's need for connection hits a brick wall. The silence is not just an absence of words. It becomes a heavy, active presence in the relationship. It's a punitive force.
I look at that exact same emotional geometry, but I see a completely different architecture of responsibility. Lola Dune's lyrics are remarkable precisely because they explicitly take ownership of her own hyper-expressive nature. She doesn't shy away from the resulting misunderstandings her intensity causes. The rude boy isn't a villain exerting power over her, nor is he utilizing silence as a punitive weapon. As the source material strongly suggests, he is simply someone who is built differently emotionally.
Built differently or just refusing to engage?
I mean, come on.
No, differently. Look, he might be overwhelmed, he might be avoidant, or he might just be genuinely unsure of how to respond to such a high volume of communication. Lola's work is less about the cruelty of his silence and entirely more about her loud reactions to it. Her songs map out how her inherent tendency to fill it out, to bridge every gap with her own narrative, creates an emotional snowball out of what is essentially a harmless small flake. She is documenting her own cognitive distortions. She is not indicting his quietness.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on the Santa mythology and the nature of this so-called harmless void. You frame his silence as merely a passive trait, as if he's just a quiet guy standing in the corner. But when you listen to January's song, that void is practically suffocating. Lola literally sings, "I thought silence meant absence. Turns out I was wrong." She is forced to navigate this grueling interpretive puzzle just to figure out if she still has a friend.
But is it a puzzle he maliciously built, or a puzzle she constructed out of her own insecurities?
It's a puzzle created by his lack of basic communicative reciprocity. Think about the sheer frustration of literally waiting for a basic confirmation of receipt. She has to sing, "I got the gift, January confirms." The expressive person in this dynamic is left carrying the entire emotional burden of the relationship. The rude boy provides an open door, sure, but he offers absolutely no light by which to see what's inside the room. By starving the connection of basic feedback, his silence actively forces her into the position of the overthinker. It is a severe communication gap. The lack of response isn't benign space, it is an active withholding that generates her anxiety.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. Using the very lyrics you are pointing to in January's song, Lola is explicitly confessing her own misinterpretation of his actions. Let's look at the lyrics. "I went a little Willy Wonka, cued the sweetness way too fast, asking what else you got while holding what already lasted." That is a massive admission.
What do you think she means by the Willy Wonka line specifically? Because I read that very differently.
It's a reference to Veruca Salt, or really any of the kids who just greedily consume everything in the chocolate factory without appreciating it. She is directly saying that the tension was internally generated by her insatiable need for immediate, continuous feedback. She consumed the connection greedily and demanded more before processing what was already there. Furthermore, she recognizes that the void was not hostile. Listen to how she describes what he actually offered. She says, "No pressure, no demand, just an open door and a quiet understanding." And the crucial line follows immediately. That I absolutely misread at the time.
But she only misread it because there was no communication to guide her reading.
She is taking full accountability for viewing his quiet grace and the space he offered as an abandonment. As she sings, some people give space, some people give room. The silence wasn't starving her. She was simply chewing the sweetness too fast and demanding a feast when he had already provided a steady, if quiet, presence.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it ignores how that behavior operates in real time. You're treating his silence as this noble, stoic virtue. And this brings us to the snowball effect we see so clearly in February's song. You argue she takes accountability, but let's look at the catalyst of that snowball. Lola sings, "When you speak in half lines, I finish what you start." It is not just pure monastic silence she's reacting to. It is the breadcrumbs.
Breadcrumbs implies intentional manipulation. I don't think the text supports the idea that he is stringing her along maliciously.
I would argue it does, purely through the effect it has. The rude boy gives one-word replies at the end of January, which she desperately holds on to like proof you had not said goodbye. Then he posts vague social media updates. The lyric quotes him saying, "Same as it ever was." Now, sure, that's a classic Talking Heads reference, but in the context of a strained friendship where one person is waiting for an answer, it's infuriatingly cryptic. She understandably takes these things personally because they are interacting in a vacuum of real communication. These mixed signals, fading back when the signal gets thin, offering only half lines, are exactly what trigger her overthinking.
But again, she is the one taking the half line and running a marathon with it.
Because nature abhors a vacuum, and so does human connection. The silence combined with these meager breadcrumbs of attention actively rolls the snowball.
Yes, it is a mutual misattunement, but his absolute lack of clarity and his refusal to communicate cleanly is the necessary catalyst. He is not a passive bystander. His vagueness is the mechanism that winds her up.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered how fiercely Lola defends his intentions and indicts her own processing of those half-lines? She doesn't blame him for rolling the snowball. She clearly claims her own hands are on it. In February's song, she states plainly, "You go quiet, I go loud. You stay vague, I fill it out." She is highlighting a mechanical reaction within herself. She even uses this incredible phrasing, "Maybe I poured it on too thick like oxygen through a straw."
Which is a beautiful, tragic metaphor.
It is profound. Think about the physics of that. If someone needs air and you force high-pressure oxygen through a tiny straw, it doesn't help them breathe. It just creates overwhelming, painful pressure. It's a brilliant metaphor for someone who realizes their own intensity is simply too much for the vessel it's being pushed through. She admits that she packed that small flake too tight. She recognizes they did not need an avalanche. They just needed clearer light. And crucially, she concludes the thought with, "Not a blizzard, not a fight, just one small flake packed too tight." She explicitly removes the blame from him. She frames this as two people in winter misreading what they mean. The silence wasn't a weapon designed to make her crazy. It was simply the reality of two mismatched communication styles, where her anxiety did the heavy lifting of escalating the tension.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently when we consider the musical wrapper of this entire project. We cannot divorce this emotional escalation from the sonic environment in which it is presented. The role of the ska and rocksteady genre is absolutely vital to framing this dynamic. Remember the backstory. The rude boy is an insider. He is already in a ska band. He knows the rhythm.
Right, she actually asks him for ska consulting at one point.
Exactly. She wants ska consulting. She wants genuine friendship. She wants to share this world with him. By pairing upbeat, classic ska energy, the walking bass lines, the bright horns, the sharp upstrokes on the guitar, with the heavy psychological strain of being ignored, she dramatically heightens the sense of imbalance. Think about how ska makes you feel. It's kinetic. It demands movement and interaction. The genre's inherent energy emphasizes the loud, frantic heartbeat of the expressive person, crashing against the rigid wall of silence.
I agree the contrast is stark, but I read the function of that contrast differently. Ska has a long tradition of pairing upbeat tempos with heartbreak. Think of the English Beat or the Specials.
Absolutely, it's the tears of a clown dynamic. But here, the music itself is loud, colorful, and demanding of a response, which perfectly represents her internal state, while he remains the unmoving, silent subject of the songs. The choice of ska elevates her internal panic into a public, sonic reality. It underlines how isolating it is to be dancing to a vibrant rhythm all alone, while the person who inspired it refuses to even step onto the floor. It highlights the sheer imbalance of their dynamic.
I come at it from a different way entirely. Lola's use of the ska and rocksteady genre is precisely what prevents her from becoming a tragic victim in this narrative. This isn't a desperate cry for help set to an ironic beat. It's a confident claiming of space. We have to look at her influences. She explicitly looks up to the legendary women who helped define the sound. Artists like Doreen Schaffer of the Scotalites and Pauline Black of the Selector.
True legends in the genre.
Exactly. When we talk about Pauline Black, we're talking about a woman who commanded the stage in a male-dominated two-tone era with absolute authority and style. Lola is explicitly invoking that specific type of armor when she uses the ska format to protect her vulnerability. She is steadying their stage presence, their confidence, and their absolute command of the groove. When she jokes that she is too old for American Idol, she is flashing a self-deprecating charm that shows a mature artist fully in control of her narrative.
But she's still fundamentally asking for his validation within that space, isn't she?
I don't think it's just about validation. She isn't weaponizing the brass section against his silence. She is using what she brilliantly calls ska diplomacy. In her Offbeat Ska Hour interview, she literally asks for a reset. She is acknowledging her own flaws and offering an olive branch, not an accusation. The genre allows her to process her overthinking with joy and resilience. It proves she is a student of the music and of her own emotional landscape, not merely a casualty of his quietness. She uses the upbeat tempo to keep herself moving forward, rather than sinking into the weight of the silence.
To summarize my position in light of our discussion today, I maintain that Lola Dune's music masterfully captures the sheer gravity of silence in human relationships. Through January Song, February Song, and More Than I Needed, she validates the agonizing interior experience of the expressive person. When a quiet counterpart withdraws, it is rarely experienced as a neutral giving of space. It is experienced as an interpretive void that breeds uncertainty and fear. Lola's lyrical documentation of this dynamic exposes how the failure to communicate, even passively, exerts an active pressure that can severely distort a connection. It ultimately leaves the louder person to shoulder the entire burden of translation, as well as the pain of perceived abandonment.
And to summarize my perspective, the true brilliance of these tracks, and frankly, the anticipation for the upcoming March song, lies in their profound intellectual humility. Lola Dune is not pointing a finger at the void. She is bravely holding up a mirror to herself. She meticulously dissects her own tendency to overwhelm, to pour oxygen through a straw, and to manufacture avalanches out of small flakes. In doing so, she actually offers deep empathy to the quieter individuals in the world who simply need space and who communicate without balloons or immediate validation. Her work is a triumph of self-awareness, exploring how our own internal anxieties so often construct the very relational conflicts we fear.
While we clearly disagree on where the ultimate responsibility for this misattunement lies, we certainly agree that Lola Dune's ability to weave complex psychological theory into the classic, vibrant energy of ska and rocksteady is deeply impressive. She has taken a highly specific, deeply personal dynamic and turned it into a compelling musical narrative that resonates on a much broader level.
Absolutely. The tension between loud, expressive personalities and quiet, withdrawn ones is a universal human dynamic, and it remains beautifully unresolved in her music. It is a testament to her songwriting that we can debate these perspectives so thoroughly, without either side feeling like they have the definitive answer.
For those listening, there is an incredibly rich emotional and musical landscape to explore in this material. We highly encourage you to seek out Lola Dune's catalog on Spotify, Apple Music, and other streaming platforms. Experience the walking bass lines, the bright horns, and the striking emotional honesty for yourselves. Take a listen and decide in your own mind who is really rolling the snowball. Thank you for joining us for this rigorous intellectual exchange. Until next time.